podium. He is the man who raises the bar, who raises the stats, who takes things to stratospheric levels, and he's only got 3 corners now. He can see the crowd standing and giving him that round of applause. He is ready to kickstart the celebrations. 8 times we've said it before. Here's a 9th for you. Lewis Hamilton wins the British Grand Prix. What a victory! Hamilton is back.
Que lo que, mi gente? Welcome to the Monoplaza F1 podcast. As always, I'm your host, Emi Bertre, and this week we are covering the British Grand Prix. Now, I told y'all last week that if Lewis Hamilton won, I would be insufferable. So, all right, first and foremost, let's get this out of the way. Congratulations to Lewis Hamilton and Lewis Hamilton only. No, I'm kidding. Congratulations to Lewis. Congratulations to Mercedes. That's 2 wins in a row. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, obviously. But yeah, wow. I would be lying if I didn't tell y'all or say to you all that I was overcome with emotion. It has been an arduous 2.5 years or so for me to watch Lewis Hamilton finish out P1. Without a doubt, he is the master of Silverstone, having won there obviously now 9 times in his career. But I don't know, y'all. It was the situation where even for me as a fan, I was starting to think, oh man, it is hard to see him out there in a car that's obviously not fast. I'm talking about obviously the W13, the W14. And honestly, I thought, and I talked about it earlier this year in our previous episodes, that like, yes, the W15 was somehow worse than the W13 and the W14. What the hell was James Allison doing? First, I'm sorry, James Allison. I apologize for ever doubting you. You cooked, all right, because this car is now the most winningest car since the W12. Holy crap. Oh, man. Yeah, so I retract all of my words. But yeah, it was definitely an emotional win. For me personally, yes, I try to be as unbiased as possible, but I mentioned this in the past. I'm a Lewis Hamilton fan. I think he is the greatest of all time. I am so happy and so lucky to have been alive during his run of success, obviously with all 8 World Drivers Championship. Yes, I said 8. No, I don't want to get into it, but if you really doubt it, Michael Massey screwed him over. And yeah, probably not to the extent of Lewis. I just felt this huge weight that was lifted off of my shoulders. Again, I am in no way, shape, or form trying to compare myself to Sir Lewis Hamilton. I'm just telling you that as a fan, it was extremely tough to see the run of dominance that Max Verstappen has been enjoying for the last, let's call it 2 seasons, because this season is a little bit different. Obviously, other cars have started to catch up to him. And it was extremely frustrating because people were constantly saying, you know, he's washed, he needs to retire. Ferrari made a huge mistake. They should have never signed him. Signs this. Leclerc's going to mop him up. It didn't matter. For me, this race was won on pure pace alone. I can't tell y'all how many times I've watched a replay. I can't tell you how many times I saw the message between him and Bono as he crossed the checkered or the finish line to get that checkered flag, finishing P1. Anyway, so I'll get into it. Yeah, other things that I want to talk about. I want to talk about Max Verstappen. Surprisingly, yes, I do want to talk about Max Verstappen. I want to talk about Red Bull, and I want to talk about McLaren. Those are going to be the top 3 topics for me. Obviously, I'll touch a little bit on Nico Hülkenberg and the amazing job that he's doing over at Haas. This is week 1,000 of Carlos Sainz still not choosing a team that he's going to go to. Latest rumor, he's going to Alpine. We're going to talk about that a little bit. and yeah, it is a very, very exciting week for me. I'm going to spend this week and the next week just savoring that win. Yes, it felt very much emotional. Yes, it felt like a weight was lifted off. It also saw the return of some of my favorite podcasts of people who I truly enjoy listening to that just came back. Shouts out Quick Stop, F1 Podcast, Nasha, Thandy, and of course, Tasha. So yeah, uh, let's get into it. So Lewis Hamilton, the greatest of all time, his win aside, let's talk about this race. This race, obviously, besides Lewis having won, was probably one of the more exciting races for me. Right, it had everything. It had British top three after qualifying. Right, we had George, Lewis, and Lando, 1, 2, 3, all British. Potential podium hadn't happened since like 1960 something for British people, particularly. I think the last time it happened was the French somehow got all three people on a podium, but this was really significant. All weekend, it felt like I don't know. I had a good about Mercedes and their car in general. They were coming off a win in Austria. Yes, it was fortuitous, but like I said last week, George still had to be there. He still had to be in a car that still held up, and he still had to drive, and he got that P1. Great. Coming into this weekend, I had a feeling that, particularly if the weather was either cold or raining, that although there weren't that many slow speed corners, Mercedes somehow, and yes, it was probably my delusion, Mercedes somehow will be able to pull this one off. Now, during all the free practices, Lando and the McLaren were obviously proving to be extremely fast. Same thing with Piastri. He finished atop of the free practices. So I was like, oh, okay, there's still hope. Only because for me, Mercedes was still kind of hanging around, right? Then when we got to qualifying, you saw that the weather was cooperating with Mercedes, right? And that car, for whatever reason, does really well when it is cold. It does really well when it is raining. Let's go back to Canada, where George was able to capture a pole. And even in this qualifying, it came down to the very end, and George was also able to eke out another pole position. That would be his second within the last three weeks. Hey, don't quote me on that. All right. So yeah, it was really great. And yes, for those watching at home, the qualifying head to head is clearly in George's favor, but whatever, right? They both have one win under their belt, and as it stands today, George is only 1 point ahead of Lewis. So great, he's been out qualifying Lewis at a crazy rate, but they're actually close in the driver championship, and both of them are actually about to pass Checo Perez, and that is a great segue into what I thought was happening with Red Bull, right? So again, we talked about this qualifying situation. Red Bull, it never felt like Max Verstappen was comfortable in the setup of the car this week. Definitely didn't feel like he was as comfortable as Checo, because surprisingly, yes, Max has out qualified Checo basically this entire season. But Checo was, at least during the free practices, able to keep up with him. But of course, qualifying happened and disaster. Literally, Checo is under an immense amount of pressure. Um, and I don't know if it's getting to him. I don't know if knowing that your seat is in peril in spite of having to sign a 2-year contract, or actually not even a 2-year contract. I believe it's a 1+1. But this weekend, it's not a great one. It was not a great one for Checo. He beached his car in Q1, and he basically started the race at P19. So he was out qualified by Logan Sargent. He would have been out qualified by Pierre Gasly, but Pierre was facing 50 50th place grid penalty for taking on a new power unit. Out qualified by Albon, out qualified by Hulkenberg, out qualified by Logan Sargent, right? We can go on and on and on and on. And questions have been mounting for several weeks now whether or not Checo is really up to the task, right? Whether or not Checo should remain in that Red Bull seat. And as the weekend progressed, it came out that, hey, Liam Lawson was going to be testing the RB20 during a filming day at Silverstone. Christian Horner, of course, will reveal later on that this was the plan all along. So it was already something that had been planned for a long time. Don't read too much into it. You know, Liam Lawson, he's just coming because he's our reserve driver, blah, 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 this, that, and the third, right? But of course, no one would be surprised if Checo got replaced. Now, lesser drivers have gotten replaced mid-season. Famously, Pierre Gasly, obviously Alex Albon, both replaced. Gasly being replaced, I think, mid-season by Alex Albon, and then Albon being dropped to have Checo. Now, out of those last three drivers, Pierre Gasly had an overall higher finish or position finishes than Checo Perez, and Checo Perez had a higher one than Alex Albon. So I think on average, Pierre was finishing 7th, 8th place. On average, Checo was finishing 8th, maybe 9th, and on average, Alex Albon was not too far behind. But the point that I'm trying to make is that Checo still has a seat, which is surprising, but everyone wonders or has to wonder how long before Red Bull's patience wears off. And I think they've already reached that point. Maybe the Constructors Championship is not something that they're thinking about. Okay, that's fine. They're not thinking about it. However, as teams have started catching up to Max, you have the strong duo of McLaren with Piastri and Lando. You have the strong duo of Mercedes, who has now joined the party with Hamilton and Russell. And if they ever get their act together, Ferrari will also be joining the party with Sainz and Leclerc. Max Verstappen cannot take on all of these people consistently, because what you are asking him to do is perform at 110, 120, 150% every weekend. Not to mention all the inner turmoil happening at Red Bull with Jos Verstappen and Christian Horner. They obviously hate each other. Toto Wolff openly courting Max Verstappen, saying like he's going to come here. So Christian Horner, I don't feel sorry for him at all. At all. Frankly, I'm still surprised he has a job. I said what I said. Especially given all of the allegations that he faced earlier in the year. Again, I said what I said. But more than anything, I guess I'm just wondering what he is going to do if Max leaves to go at Mercedes. Because at least within the last 2 weeks, Mercedes has started to look like a team that is starting to put a car together. And we've all talked about in 2026 with the new engine regulations, maybe that's a team that would become an interesting target for Verstappen. I don't know. Will he leave? I don't know. I don't think he'll end his career with Red Bull, but whatever. He's under contract with Red Bull until 2028. Now, going back to Red Bull, Checo was out Q1, Max qualified P4. Right. Again, that car never seemed like it was going to perform well, which I completely expected. Admittedly, yes, I wanted Mercedes to win, specifically Lewis Hamilton. But again, as the weekend kind of wore on, we got through all the free practices and even through qualifying. Qualifying was a little bit surprising for me. I'm not going to lie. Not the order that it ended, but that the two Mercedes were able to do a front row lockout. And I was like, hey, are we back in the Bottas Hamilton days of old? Are we back? I don't know. But we start the race Sunday. The weather was basically what people have been saying is British weather. Now, I am not a citizen of England. I am not a citizen of the United Kingdom. I don't know what the weather is like in Silverstone, but apparently this is typical of British summers. So the rain played into the hands of Mercedes and McLaren. Now, as the race started, obviously, um, George got an amazing getaway. Lewis got an amazing getaway. Max also got an amazing getaway. He was able to pass Lando up from P4 to P3. Great. But what was interesting to see that almost immediately you start to see that Mercedes is starting to build a gap. And then eventually Lando was able to pass Max, and Max got passed again and again. And so I was like, oh, okay. So Red Bull is not going to be on the podium. Those were my thoughts initially. Now, something that happened that was really important as the race progresses is when it started raining, you saw who was more confident in their ability to drive in the rain. And it's great because as it happened, Lewis Hamilton, his experience, his savvy as a driver came out, and he was able to pass George on track. That was an extremely important move for him to get past George because he needed to be the lead Mercedes so that the strategy would be favorable to him. Now, almost immediately, as soon as Lewis was able to pass George, they made a mistake, went off track. Lando was able to pass both of them, and then Oscar was able to pass both of them, right? So it went from a Mercedes 1-2 to a McLaren 1-2, whatever. All right. In the interim, Max was just hanging around in the periphery, in the background, and the rain keeps going. Now, what I do want to call out, oftentimes on this podcast, I've said that Max Verstappen, say what you will about him, he is a generational talent. You may not like Max, you may not like Red Bull, but you have to respect his ability as a driver to go in and do what he has to do to win. Now, many times it's very controversial because he races kind of like, hey, you're going to let me through or we're going to crash. Okay, where's the racecraft? But the kid has talent. What I will continue to say, and I said it literally earlier, is that he is going to need some help if they want to secure more victories, because it is no longer a situation where Red Bull can just blast off into the sunset and be able to pull out a victory and gap the entire field by 20, 40, a minute, whatever it is, right? Regulations have started to catch up, and now everybody seems to be, or at least the top teams seem to be on equal footing. So for me, again, backtracking on something that I said earlier, I still feel confident that Max Verstappen is going to win, because for every time, right, we talk about this season is definitely better than last season. I agree. There have been 6 different race winners in the first 12 rounds. The other 6 races, Max Verstappen has won by himself. So every time somebody new wins, as long as Max is on the podium or finishes high within the point, so anywhere between P2 to P5, right? That's points that Max is getting. And the person who's closest to him right now is Lando. But if Lando is not winning or if getting on the podium and other people keep winning, this is only advantageous to Max. That's pretty common, right? But I have to give kudos to him because at some point when it started to rain, they made the call, hey, come in, we're going to put you on inners. And then at some point again, they were like, hey, Max, start thinking about slicks. He's like, no, the track's it's still wet in a lot of places, right? Similar call to what Lewis Hamilton said when they said, hey, we got some inters, or we've got some slicks ready for you, we have some inters ready for you whenever you're ready. And Lewis was saying, hey, it's still dry, let's just hold off. And both of them were able to, with the assistance of their team, have the correct strategy and be able to get on that immediately, or at the perfect time. Now, for Max, ultimately, he ended up what I would say not a comeback drive or a recovery drive, because he did start P3 when it started to clear up and it stopped raining and the track started to dry up. I have to say, putting him on hards and seeing how it went, the pace that he had was amazing. Right now, obviously, people are saying that if there had been a couple more laps, then Max would have passed Lewis, and that's all she wrote. great. Sure. I would uh, probably counter that and say that Lewis probably would not have been on softs if he had stopped earlier. So in other words, like they put him on softs because it was towards the end of the race and that was like the newest tire that he had. It was either softs or hard. Soft gave him the speed. And obviously Mercedes must have trusted that with his ability he would be able to nurse those tires, right? They've seen it before, it's happened, right? But again, Max drove great, was able to come back. I think he was as far down as P6 at one point, and was able to overtake Lando Norris towards the last stint because Lando had cooked his soft tires trying to catch up to Lewis. Terrible strategy by McLaren. More on that in a bit. And Max was able to finish in P2. So again, huge congratulations to the team for being able to pull that out. Again, Max did what champions do, which is just maximize points in the car that's given. Cannot say the same for his teammate. I know that I'm beating a dead horse. I don't know. I just feel like, honestly, I just feel bad for Checo because I do feel like he has the ability and we've seen that before, but maybe the pressure is just like, it's too much. And obviously people get pissed off whenever we start to criticize Checo, but I don't, I don't know, y'all. I don't know what to tell you. I hate to see him flail like this. I don't know what other team Checo would be, but even right now, does it make sense to keep him there? And frankly, if Red Bull goes the route of replacing Checo, I don't know who would they replace him with, because if you're going to replace him with a Danny Rick, to me that doesn't make sense. Yes, I know he is the favorite son of Christian Horner, right? But the skill level is basically the same at this point. And if you're doing it for money, Checo's bringing in way more money than Daniel Ricciardo. I don't know if they would be willing to give Yuki Tsunoda a shot at that second Red Bull seat. I think Yuki, frankly, is fine at VCARB where he's at. I think he deserves strong consideration if it makes sense, but right. Liam Lawson feels like, hey, he might be good. At least giving him a shot in that Red Bull seat. But I feel like Liam, honestly, should realistically go to VCARB or some other team before he goes to Red Bull, because Red Bull is a dog eat dog, and all of them are, but Red Bull more than any team is a dog eat dog team. And so if Liam were to go there and he's getting gapped by Max, you got to think that it's hurting his confidence. You got to think that, hey, the bar is too high. This is a terrible place for me to start. In any case, I don't know where Red Bull goes from here. But in the interim, yeah, they have got to figure out a solution for Checo Perez, because frankly, he is costing them a lot of points. And even their own team principal, Christian Horner, is saying this is not tenable. He has got to perform at a better rate, what have you, right? Okay. But anyways, shouts out to them. Now, if you move over to McLaren, oh man, a lot has been said about McLaren. And the thing that I will say about them is this: they have arguably the fastest car on the grid. The data is there, the timesheets don't lie. But it has been a while since McLaren has been a team that has been fighting for championships. And it shows, because McLaren is a team that seems to be on the defensive when they should be on the offensive, and on the offensive when they should be on the defensive. All right. So, case in point, Oscar Piastri was doing super well during that race. It was a McLaren 1-2, and instead of bringing them both into the pits, right? Instead of bringing both of them into the pits, they decided we're just going to bring Lando in, and then we're going to leave Oscar and bring him in later. That completely ruined Oscar Piastri's race. All right. Mistake number one. Now, post race, Oscar is saying, They told me it was going to happen. I basically agreed to it, blah, 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 this, that, and the third. Great. Awesome. Appreciate you. Uh, but again, Oscar, if you look at the data when they were on inters, right? Oscar Piastri was basically driving at the same pace as Lewis Hamilton. So there's something there. Piastri, I think, one of my favorite drivers on the grid currently. I've said it a bunch of times. He's got that dog in him. He's young, old, right? And he's a kid who's got his head on his shoulders. He's just got to get more experience under his belt to be able to do it. But frankly, I think he is quickly approaching the either on equal footing as Lando or better than Lando. And I think that when the moment comes for Oscar to become the number one driver, he is going to be better equipped than Lando. I do think Oscar has more confidence, and Lando is great. I'm not taking anything away from him, but I feel like Oscar's potential is better. That might just be my bias. So they effectively ruined Oscar's chances by pitting him after Lando and leaving him out instead of bringing him in for inters when Lando came in. All right. So mistake number one for McLaren. Mistake number two for McLaren was not being on the offensive when they needed to be. So obviously towards the end of the race, lap 39, Lewis and Max come in and they come out for slicks. Lewis on the softs, Max on the hards. They left Lando out a lap, right? So Lewis got his slicks on, out lap critical. They finally bring Lando into the pits. They had a terrible pit stop from McLaren, and they decide to put him on slicks. Now, again, hindsight is 2020. McLaren did have a set of new mediums, which from Oscar's race data, we knew that was the superior tire, right? The pace was stronger, but instead they chose to attack Lewis. Now, I'm not going to criticize the move. I think they had confidence that they could catch up to and pass him and essentially use him as a buffer between him and Max, right? That didn't happen. Lando did not nurse those tires like Lewis did, and the tire deg eventually got to him, and he was passed on track by Max, who was basically coming at an extremely fast pace. And Max would finish the race 1.9 seconds behind Lewis. All right, fine. But for me, this was a situation where they should have said to Lando, look, we're going to bring you in. We're going to bring you in now, and we're going to put you on a new set of mediums, right? Again, I get it. Hindsight 2020. They chose to attack Lewis. Again, I don't feel like it was a terrible move, but I question whether it was the right move given the pace that Lando had to keep, right? Because once he came out of the pits, he was, I think, 3 seconds behind Lewis. And Lando would later say, like, at the pace Lewis was going, that he would eventually be passed on track. So McLaren, I want them to succeed, but they have a lot to learn. And I fear that it may be, I don't know if it's like too little too late if Mercedes really is back. And by the way, they have upgrades. Mercedes have upgrades for the next race in Hungary and the race after that in Belgium. And they're basically just going to keep bringing upgrades at a rate that I don't think other teams will be able to keep up with, right? Cool, great. But if Mercedes is back, they are a team that won eight consecutive constructors championships. I joke a lot about, they used to just do Lewis and Inshallah. All right. Mercedes, if they are truly back, to me, that's another issue for McLaren because McLaren needs to tighten everything up, right? The other thing that I will say, and it seems like a completely random aside, obviously, at the end of the race last week, Lando had a lot to say about, Max shouldn't be racing like that. And if he doesn't apologize or if he feels like he did nothing wrong, then I've lost all respect for him. Coming into this week, Lando essentially is backing off of the comments that he made and is now saying, I was heated. Things are cool between me and Max. Lando's trying to pull in like other people. Like, yeah, I agree with Andrea Stella's statements. And Andrea, of course, had said um, Max acts like this because we did not correct him when he was doing this in 2021. And you saw a lot of times with Hamilton, right? Cool. Stella was not wrong, by the way, right? But coming into this race or into this week, when they ask Lando about that and he's backtracking, he's saying, I agree with what Andrea saying, but ultimately, I'm sure Lewis also agrees as well. But for me, dog, why are you bringing Lewis into this? Like, we asked you about it. Like, what do you think, Lando? Like, do you agree with what's being said? And so for me, I kind of hated that he backtracked from that. And one thing that I will say is that winners in F1 are unapologetically aggressive, right? And for Lando to backtrack, for me, again, just says like, some people may see it as a sign of maturity. For me, I see it as a sign of somebody who's not yet ready for the task at hand. Because to be at the front, you have to be somebody who doesn't backtrack, who is not aggressive, or sorry, who is aggressive, someone who again says what they mean. Anyway, so I don't know. I can't articulate really well. It just did not sit right with me that Lando I guess backtracked from how he felt, because I feel like that race in Austria, it was the true feeling, right? Tell me how you really feel. Lando really told us how he felt, right? Okay, awesome. The other thing that's happening, and I do kind of feel bad for him, is he was extremely morose and downtrodden after the race. He knew it got away from them. He knew that the race was 100% theirs to win. He knows that the strategy really cost them, and as much as I am delusional and say, it wouldn't have mattered, this was Lewis's race to win, I do feel like the strategy cost McLaren the win. I don't know if I feel like good or bad strategy McLaren would have won the race, because I do feel like Lewis used everything in his arsenal to win. Whatever. So something to watch for McLaren is just essentially like, what are they going to be doing moving forward? We've got Hungary up next, which is again another track that actually favors Mercedes, and Lewis particularly has won 8 times in Hungary. And if they're bringing upgrades, I don't know. As a Mercedes fan, I am hoping that Mercedes really caught up, and if that's the case, then the window for McLaren has closed, and they fumbled an opportunity to get a victory in Silverstone, a victory in Austria, a victory in Canada. That's 3 wins, 75 points. And by the way, over the last 3 races, Max Verstappen has the most points, and 8 points behind him is Lewis Hamilton. Do with that what you will. Honestly, it probably would have been Russell had Russell not DNF this race, but yeah. Anyways, so we'll see moving forward what happens with McLaren, right? Now, for me, I could not be happier with the job that Mercedes is. I waxed eloquently in the beginning about how happy I was that Lewis was able to get his 104th victory, breaking the record of 103 held by Lewis Hamilton. Anyways, and so I just felt like this was a race that Mercedes got the strategy right. They were able to lock out that front row. Again, Russell has shown that he is quick on one lap. I do feel like he's still got a lot to learn in terms of tire management. People saw that the gap between him and Lewis was, Russell was increasing that gap before the rain started in the beginning. To me, I feel like that was just Lewis nursing his tires for what would eventually be an attack. Also, he knew that it was going to rain. He just had to stay within striking distance of George. And surely, when it rained, he was able to get that move done. I said earlier it was crucial for him to get the move done. He got it done. Great, right? The teams did great with both the drivers. Bono in particular, I think, was also in the groove with Lewis. And yeah, I would say that it was unfortunate that Russell DNF this race, not because of anything that was within his control. Obviously, he had a water pump issue, I think is what it was, which I'm assuming meant that the car was overheating. So it was unfortunate. That being said, I feel like the way that Russell drives, because it's all or nothing for him, he would have gotten passed on track by Lando. He would have gotten passed on track by Max. Maybe not, but yeah. Um, that being said, once Russell was out, it was really now at this point like, Lewis, what can you do? I think he drove amazing in the rain with those inters, but I'm also just more and more elated that he was able to show what a true tire whisperer he is, because he was able to get those softs and make those softs last for basically from lap 39 to 40 to lap 52. So that's 12 to 13 laps on a set of softs, right? Driving quickly. Obviously, had some graining on the front right, but he was able to bring that thing home. And here's what I would say. Obviously, after the race, he was extremely emotional. He was crying in the cockpit. When he got out of his car, he embraced his father, and you could just see, even though he had his helmet um, visor down, he was crying. Post race interview, he was visibly shaken in the podium. So Lewis has had a lot of wins, 104 now, and I think that the 104th one was probably one of the more memorable ones for him for various reasons. One, because he breaks the record of most wins on a single track with 9. Two, it had been 945 days since his last victory, and he'd been close in Brazil in 2022, and maybe been close this year in Canada. Don't know what would have happened last year in Qatar, which I think was another place. He got pole last year in Hungary, but the car just wasn't there. Um, and so to see him win again, and by the way, it's also been interesting for me to see that now that he won, everybody is coming out of the woodwork to wax eloquent about his skill. He's the greatest of all time. Masters, get it done, and he's generational, and blah 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 blah. And my thing is like, where was everybody when he wasn't winning? Now I understand, like, hey, when is Lewis going to get this victory? I get it. But it's been funny to see that people coming out of the woodwork. And I think that it was great for Formula One, by the way, to see Lewis Hamilton win. It is very clear that he is the most popular driver on the grid. I'm sorry, that's just facts. Um, and yeah, I was also touched by the words of his father. And also, it's pretty awesome that his dad, Anthony Hamilton, was there to see him win. And the last time you really saw Anthony be there for him, obviously, not that he hasn't attended a race since then, right? Because Anthony was there in Mexico. I think it was either last year or the year before last. And he's been around, but it was amazing that Anthony was there to see this victory. Um, and I'm not going to paraphrase it because frankly, like, I don't remember everything that he said, but it amounts to Anthony never lost confidence in his son. And sometimes you need a reminder that you are great. Again, I'm not doing it justice, but it was amazing to have his father there, and just be there for him at that moment. Now, the Lewis Hamilton fan in me says, okay, let's see what happens next week in Hungary. Let's see what happens after that. Can Lewis get more wins this year? I believe so. Whether it's him or Russell, I do feel like Mercedes' car is actually on the upswing. And I also want to kind of put to rest some of those things where people are saying, "Oh, does Lewis regret signing with Ferrari?" No, he doesn't. I would just like to call this out and kindly remind everybody that it wasn't that Lewis didn't want Mercedes. It was that Mercedes didn't want Lewis, right? So I feel like the person who maybe is regretting this is Toto Wolff, because I think more than anything this weekend was a reminder to Toto that if you put the car under Lewis and it's a competent car, he's going to get the job done. And frankly, I think he is one of the few, if not the only person on the grid who can really bring the fight to Max Verstappen. I don't think Lewis's skills have diminished. I think he has taken really good care of himself, and I think he's still a sharp. Say with that what you will. Maybe qualifying obviously needs to be buttoned up, but the race pace is still there. The speed is still there. He's still a driver that can get it done. So if anybody's having regrets, I do feel like it is going to be Mercedes. And I say that particularly because Mercedes still hasn't signed a driver to replace Lewis. A lot was said about Andrea Kimi Antonelli, that perhaps he was going to replace Lewis, but Kimi literally got his first F2 win this past weekend, and he has admitted that the pressure is there to excel. So I understand that Toto couldn't have Kimi there waiting in the ranks for a long time, or he would risk losing Kimi to another team. But for me, at a bare minimum, should have given him being Lewis that solid contract, should have given him ambassadorship, should have given him whatever. And so I think that for Lewis, it's logical for him to move on to a team for all the reasons they may have. And I have my own theories, chief among them being slightly disrespected by Mercedes after everything he'd done for the team, all the sponsorships, all the money, all the fans, all the whatever. And I do think you'll see a mass exodus of, I'm not going to call them Mercedes fans, a mass exodus of Lewis Hamilton fans, and Ferrari is going to see a lot of new fans. I, for one, will probably be wearing 2 shirts next year. I'm still going to rock Mercedes as long as that second driver isn't someone I dislike. But I'll for sure be wearing the Scuderia Ferrari shirt. So I'm just calling it now because, yes, I'm a Lewis Hamilton fan. But the question of, does he regret signing for Ferrari, I think is a little bit overly simplistic, because it doesn't take into account the conditions that led Lewis to seek a venture somewhere else. And it doesn't make light of his treatment within the team within the last 2.5 years. So again, maybe the only person who's regretting anything is Toto, given that the driver market's not looking super great, and his driver that he's wanting to replace Lewis is not ready. Now, all of that can turn on his head if the rumors are true and Logan Sargent is dumped after the summer break and they bring Kimi in. I don't know. That's conjecture on my end, because there's also a rumor that Esteban Ocon is going to be in Haas mid-season. Everything is rumored. Silly season really kicked off on February 1st, 2024, and it's been a whirlwind ever since. So I'm not going to keep waxing eloquent on Mercedes. I just know that this victory for me meant a lot more than some of the previous victories. Yes, we were there for some of the championships that Lewis won. For me, particularly because, again, I'll admit, I started watching in 2019. I sporadically would watch here and there, but 2019 was really the year that I really got into F1. But not seeing Lewis win for that long was, I'm not going to say it was going to take a toll or had taken a toll on me, but just the overall sigh of relief and the joy I felt and the emotions I felt whenever he won. Yeah, 104 was definitely memorable. So congratulations to Sir Lewis Hamilton. Congratulations to Mercedes. Got it done. Oh, man. Yeah, that was awesome. All right. So quickly, I'm just going to touch on a couple of things. Over the weekend, Ollie Behrman was confirmed as the next driver for Haas to replace Nico Hulkenberg. No idea who's going to join him, whether it's Kevin Magnussen or whether it is going to be somebody else. So Esteban Ocon has been rumored to be taking that seat. At some point, I think Carlos Sainz was rumored to be taking that seat. It feels like Ocon is probably the best shot to replace K-Mag there. Whether or not that'll be a good driver pairing, I don't know. But if it is, trial by fire for Oscar, or not Oscar, sorry, Oliver. The other rumor is that Carlos Sainz might be going to Alpine, on top of the rumor that Alpine, as of 2026, might be engine customer of Mercedes. So, okay, that's crazy to me because Renault is a top company and they used to actually provide engines for other people. I don't know. What else? What else? What else? What else? Yeah, Logan Sargent might be leaving Williams. No word yet on whether he's going to get a new contract. I don't think he will. The question then becomes who replaces Logan at Williams, whether they bring one of their juniors up, whether Kimi comes in and replaces Logan, whether Valtteri Bottas comes in and replaces Logan. Who knows? The other thing is we don't know yet who's going to be the second Audi driver, whether it's going to be a re-up on Bottas or Zhou Guanyu. But what it is clear to me is that Carlos Sainz is not interested. And speaking of Carlos Sainz, he admitted that the pressure of not having a seat by his own design is starting to get to him. All right. So whatever. Yeah, the other thing is no clue what's going to happen to Danny Rick. He still does not have a contract. Yeah, I don't know. It's shaping up. I'm not even going to speak on Ferrari. Frankly, like Charles Leclerc has been having a terrible run at it since Monaco. It's almost like he sold his soul for that Monaco win, and now everything is just coming to roost. The one thing that I thought was like telling was that they reverted the car back to pre-Imola specs. So they've lost months of development because they can't quite figure out what's going on. We talked about this last week. Didi in particular called out that porpoising was now an issue for Ferrari. So that's a little bit wild. But in spite of Charles Leclerc having terrible run at it the last couple of weeks, Carlos Sainz has been able to capitalize again. It's not that I felt like Carlos Sainz was bad for Ferrari, but the upside of having Lewis Hamilton was too enticing for them to pass up. Yeah, so we'll see what happens. Okay, so my Matatan and my Pariguayo. I'm going to start with my Pariguayo. Pariguayo right now for me is going to be the McLaren strategy team. Really should have just gotten everything together. They have not been able to live up to the moment and just kind of crap the bed. All right. They've had 3 opportunities to win, and whether it's been the driver or whether it's been the strategy, they've just fumbled it. All right. So Pariguayo, McLaren. Sorry. Matatan, come on. Of course, Matatan is Lewis Hamilton. Win 104, the most ever out of any driver in Formula One history, proving that he still got it. And by the way, being vulnerable with everybody, talking about some of the mental health issues that he'd been dealing with for the last 2.5 years. Yeah, this victory was amazing. Matatan for sure. And yes, I know he's only in 8th place in the drivers championship, but whatever, a win is a win, dog. So yeah, Matatan, Lewis Hamilton. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you as always for joining and watching the podcast. As always, don't forget to subscribe, like, leave a comment. Tell your tios, your tias, your mamis, your papis, abuelos, abuela for the Monoplaza F1 podcast. I am Emi Beltre. Peace.